You want better photos? Shoot in manual mode, that's the advice. But photographers, they don't use manual mode all the time. 55% of photographers shoot in aperture priority. Yes, 55% of photographers shoot in aperture priority. When you see an awesome photo, you're not asking what mode was that camera in. You're enjoying the photo. You might notice the light. You might notice shadows. You may notice the composition. But one thing you're not going to notice is what mode the camera was in. You think National Geographic photographers argued about the mode? They probably had opinions, but at the end, they just got the photo. So with aperture priority, you can control the light that's coming into your camera. And that's why pros like it. There are two reasons pros use aperture priority. One, it controls bokeh, which is the amount of focus depth you have, and it helps you control how much light's coming in based on the size of the aperture. This photo of a fox pulled in $275 at a fundraiser. I shot it in aperture priority mode. The fox wasn't going to wait around for me to get shutter priority set correctly. This blue heron also pulled in some money for another fundraiser. Again, was an aperture priority. On both of these photos, I have the settings that I had set for these photos. Rewind, check it out if you missed the first one. In aperture priority, I get to control the look while the camera handles the math. Could I shoot in manual? Sure, but why make it harder? But let me be clear. Any mode, you can get a great photo. Do you have to shoot in auto? No, that's probably the least one you want to shoot in. Looking at the statistics, I think only 2% of photographers ever used auto, and that's usually when they handed it to their assistant to go snap some photos at a wedding. In aperture priority, you get to control the depth of field. A small aperture means a bigger hole, less in focus. As a child, I used to squint my eyes, which made a small aperture, and I could see starbursts from the church lights and the street lights. I could see the streams coming off, and the aperture is the same as your pupil. If you ever had your eyes dilated at the eye doctor, they make them really wide. That is a small aperture number or a larger hole, and you can't see very well. It's hard to focus, right? So the camera has the same problem. But in portrait photography, a lot of photographers want that shallow depth of field, so they get the bokeh background. So with the aperture, they're controlling the exposure and controlling the depth of the field. There is a mistake that some beginner photographers can make in aperture priority, and we'll talk about that. But first, let me share some things I learned with my first digital camera. My first digital camera did not have an automatic ISO. I had aperture priority, shutter priority, manual mode, and ISO had to be manually set to something. Modern cameras now, you can have something called automatic ISO. So when you're in aperture priority, if you set an ISO, the only thing left to adjust is the shutter speed. So my first digital camera, I had to pick the ISO. So I had to learn a little bit about the ISO. You already learned about the aperture. A larger hole lets more light in, but it also means a shallower depth of field. If I'm doing landscape and I want a larger depth of field, I'm probably going to be having a smaller aperture, which is going to be like f11, a bigger number. So what I had to do is I had to learn how ISO works. The higher the ISO number, think of a stereo with a volume knob. You turn the volume up and you keep turning it up. Yeah, it gets louder and louder, but eventually it gets distorted. Same thing with ISO. You can turn it higher and higher, but the higher you get, the more noisy it gets. So most cameras can take great photos around 1,600, 1,600. The more modern cameras, even better. I'm not afraid to shoot mine at 6,400, even 128,000. I have no problems doing that if I need to. But my initial camera, I think I had 100, 200, 400, 800, 1,600. That was my options. So if it was pretty dimly lit out, I immediately put it at 1,600. As an aperture priority, the only thing the camera can now adjust is the shutter, and ISO is at 1,600. If it's too bright, then I can turn my ISO down. So you just need to learn how to adjust that. If you put your camera in auto ISO, pay attention to your camera and look at the photo after you've taken a few. Some people call that peeping, and you shouldn't do that. But if you're out there and you're taking photos of something and you don't check at least a couple of times once in a while, and you get home and you go, boy, I wish I would have peeked. Well, it's too late then. So take a couple peeks, zoom in on your LCD and see if it's actually in focus. See if you're getting what you want. Adjust that ISO if you need to. You don't have to leave it in auto. So that's what I learned early on. I can set the ISO. The only thing the camera can adjust now is the shutter speed. If my photos are too blurry and I want to keep this aperture, I'll raise to a higher ISO so my shutter speed can go faster. If you're getting value out of this, hit the like and subscribe. I appreciate it. So let's not discount manual. I said 55% of photographers use aperture priority. 35% are in manual mode. I think 25% go to shutter priority or something like that. Maybe 10%. I can't remember. It's much lower. The two bottom ones were auto and shutter priority. So aperture priority was number 1. Manual was number 2. So you should learn manual, but don't force yourself into manual unless you're ready for it. So here are some examples when I would use manual mode. If I'm in a studio, I have controlled lighting. I did indoor photos for my nephew's wedding rehearsal. The light wasn't changing. I was in manual mode. If you're doing flash work, another one of my favorite for manual mode is fireworks, and you're in manual mode, manual focus, you're in manual everything because you're doing long exposures, 1 second, 30 seconds. If you do any light trails, again, manual mode. You're not going to be able to do it. But you could probably do shutter priority and set a shutter speed of 30 seconds or something like that. But for the most part, you're probably going to be in manual mode. So most beginners struggle, and it's interesting when I did research on this. I don't agree with what most beginners struggle with, because here's what I struggle with, and I'm sure you're a lot like I am, is I'll watch a video on YouTube just like you're watching right now, and it makes a lot of sense. You go out in the field, you're ready to do it, and you don't know which knob turns what. Or maybe you learned it while you're playing with it, but you get out in the field, you start fumbling. And that was my biggest difficulty. I understood a faster shutter speed meant less light and it would freeze the motion. I understood you turn up the ISO, it gets brighter because there's the volume knob for the brightness. I understood that the hole's bigger for the aperture, more light gets in, but it's like my pupils, if they're dilated, I can't focus very good. I understood all that. But when you get out in the field and you go, ooh, I want, what do I want? What do I want? How do I set this? And it's gone, and you miss the photo. I missed so many photos trying to figure out how to adjust my camera. That's my number one problem. Now, going through the years, people says it's just simple. It's just a exposure triangle. There is a lot more to the exposure triangle. That is where the creativity comes. The math is simple. The theory is simple. But when you want to play with some things with shutter priority, aperture priority, manual mode, and all the different settings that you can play with to get a look and artistic feel that you want, it can be really interesting. So here are some times I use aperture priority. Number 1, that's my default mode. I have 3 modes I set my camera up in. I have a dial for those 3 modes. And my number 1 mode is aperture priority. Because if I pick up my camera and I want to take a photo, I want to know that I can most likely point it at something and take a photo and get a decent photo. I don't have to think. So aperture priority is my number 1. I use it for indoor photography. I use it for landscape photography. I use it for street photography. The biggest thing I don't use it for is indoor photography with controlled lighting. The best photographers are not obsessed with camera modes. They are obsessed with light, color, and composition. So master manual mode, master aperture priority, master shutter speed. Find the one that works best for you, and don't be afraid to not be in manual mode. This is Doug Gabbard, practicing photography, getting better 1 photo at a time.